Hey guys, get your social studies books out and open them up to page 160. I know you can see mine on the screen, but you're going to need your book anyway for the assignment for today. So go ahead and get your book out. Page 160. We're going to look at today just 4 pages, 160 through 164. I guess that's 5 pages officially. But anyway, we're going to look at this pages. We're going to look at 2 things. We're going to look at this election of 1860, how the southern states respond to who gets elected, and it's not real pretty. And actually, the very first battle of the Civil War will end our lesson today. So we've got a lot to cover, but just in a short few pages. Now, again, you'll need your book today to do the assignment. So go ahead and get it out and follow along with me. Notice this political cartoon here. Look at the guys fighting. I mean, there's people arguing. This guy's got a hold of this guy's hat, and he's got him in a headlock or something. This guy's got a cane or something ready to hit somebody. What is this? What's going on? Well, it's people were going to vote for president. They're fighting over who they want to be president. That doesn't sound so different from 2020, does it? Lots of people fighting over who they thought should be president. That's because politics hasn't changed that much. History repeats itself. People are very passionate about who they think should be voted in as president or whatever position they might be voting for. So this was a big deal in 1860, this election of the president in 1860. The tensions between the North and the South were already very high. The presidential election of 1860 would tear the nation apart. By 1860, there was a new political party, the Republican Party. Republicans did not want slavery to spread outside the South. When it came time to elect a new president, they nominated Abraham Lincoln. Now, this is really important to remember that the Republicans didn't want slavery to spread outside the South. That means probably everybody in the South does not want a Republican to be president because they knew whoever it would be would want slavery to stop. And so they weren't for the Republican candidate. People in the South who owned slaves weren't. And this Republican candidate was Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln and the Republicans said they did not want to abolish slavery. They weren't going to try to get rid of it for good, but they didn't want it to spread anymore. Remember that. That's important to know for what happens next. The Democratic Party became split over the slavery issue. As a result, the party nominated 2 different people for president. They couldn't decide on one, so they chose 2. The Southern Democrats nominated John C. Breckinridge of Kentucky, who supported slavery. So the first person running for president as a Democrat was this guy, John Breckinridge. He supported slavery. He wanted slavery to spread. He thought it should be okay to have slavery everywhere. And the Northern Democrats nominated Stephen A. Douglas of Illinois, who supported popular sovereignty. So this was the other candidate for the Democrats, Stephen Douglas. And he said, we ought to let the the territories that become states decide for themselves whether or not they want slavery. Remember, that's what popular sovereignty is. And these 2, Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas, became the main candidates for president. The Constitutional Union Party. Some people didn't like any of the candidates. They decided to create a new political party, the Constitutional Union Party. Members of this party did not want to talk about slavery at all. They nominated John Bell, a U.S. Senator from Tennessee. He owned many slaves, but he did not want slavery to spread. He just wanted everybody to quit arguing about it. Isn't that a funny attitude to have? I want slaves, but I don't care if you have slaves or not. Let's just quit talking about it. Leave me alone and do your own thing. Let's quit talking about slavery, was his attitude. Well, we know who wins the election, don't we? Lincoln wins the election. Lincoln won the election, even though he did not get a single vote in the South. In all but Virginia, his name did not even appear on the ballot. Most Southerners did not believe him when he said he would not abolish slavery. They voted for Breckinridge. Bell won the states of Tennessee, Kentucky, and Virginia. He won them. Missouri was the only state that Douglas won. Abraham Lincoln said, "No man is good enough to govern another man without that other's consent or agreement." So he thinks you ought to be able to vote and vote for who gets to be the president. In other words, you shouldn't govern unless you're given the right to govern somebody. Now, I want you to look at the map here of how people voted. Everywhere that's an orange state, here on page 161, voted for Abraham Lincoln. So you see that. Everybody who's a pink state voted for Breckinridge, the guy that was for slavery. So you can see all the southern states voted for Breckinridge, and Maryland and Delaware did as well. Remember, Maryland was where Harriet Tubman was from, so they had slaves. Bell, this guy who said, let's just quit talking about slavery, he was from Tennessee. Well, he won in Tennessee, Kentucky, and Virginia. And the only state that Stephen Douglas won was Missouri. So Abraham Lincoln wins the election, even though it's very close, obviously, between him and Breckinridge. There was a lot of debates that happened during the election between Abraham Lincoln and Douglas that are very famous, and we'll read more about them later on. Let's move to page 162 now. So we see the Confederate States of America. What is this? Remember, we've talked about this word secede or secession several times now, and it means to break away from the United States. The Union is a word that means the United States. And look at these people, this political cartoon. What are they trying to say, do you think? You've got these people out on a limb. They're going to cut away, break away from the Union, and they're going to be their own states, not part of the United States. What's going to happen to this artist? What do you think is going to happen to them? They're going to fall and get hurt, aren't they, if they break away from the United States? Because when they cut through this limb, they're falling because it's the only thing that's holding them up. Confederate States of America. When the Southern states learned that Lincoln had been elected, they talked about seceding from the Union. Remember, seceding means breaking away from the United States, saying we're not part of the United States anymore. 1 month after the election, the General Assembly in South Carolina voted to do just that. Can you believe it? South Carolina says, fine, if Abraham Lincoln's the president, we're not going to be part of the United States anymore. And then in February of 1861, representatives from South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas met. They organized don't miss this, a new country, not the United States. They organized these states, said, we're not part of the United States. We're making our own country. We are not the United States of America anymore. We are the Confederate States of America, or more simply, the Confederacy. A confederacy is a number of people, parties, or groups, or states that agree to help each other. For the first and only time in its history, the United States was no longer united. They're not united anymore. They just lost all of these states. The Confederacy chose their own president. They said Abraham Lincoln's not going to be our president. Our president is Jefferson Davis. The Confederacy chose Jefferson Davis from Mississippi as president. Confederate lawmakers wrote a constitution similar to the U.S. Constitution. Their governing document said each state was independent and able to govern itself. It also said that slavery would be legal in all states. So, I want you to think back, when we think about their Constitution, the Confederate States of America, think back to those two words we learned earlier in the year, federalist and anti-federalist. Federalists wanted a strong central government to control the states. Anti-federalists thought the state should have more power. Obviously, these Confederate lawmakers in their Constitution were anti-federalists. They said every state should make decisions for itself. We shouldn't have a government that makes decisions for the states. Every state should have its own government that makes decisions just for their state. So they were the Confederate States of America. Can you believe that? Let's look at this right here. This is from South Carolina's Declaration of Secession, not of independence, but declaration that they're not going to be part of the United States anymore. We the people, isn't that interesting? They start it like the Constitution, the preamble. We the people of South Carolina, by our delegates in convention assembled, appealing to the supreme judge of the world for honesty of our purpose, have declared that the union heretofore existing between this state and the other states of North America is ended, and that the state of South Carolina has taken her position among the nations of the world as a separate and independent state. Unbelievable that South Carolina, they were the first, and then remember some other states joined them to become their own country. Now, you might have to turn your book sideways, but if you look at the map here on page 163, all the kind of tan, the kind of brownish states or territories, they're part of the United States. This green, they're called border states. They're kind of on the border between the United States and the Confederate States. The pink seceded. They're not part of the United States anymore after the Civil War began. The pink seceded before the attack on Fort Sumter. These were the first states, as we just read, to say we're not part of the United States anymore. We're our own country called the Confederate States of America. And yes, you see our own state seceded. So the spot where you are standing or sitting right now at one time was not part of the United States. It was part of the Confederate States of America. Tennessee broke away from the Union. We certainly did. Let's go to page 164. And the Battle of Fort Sumter. This is going to be the first battle of the Civil War. Look at this picture here. This fort down in Charleston, out in the middle of the water. If you've ever been to Charleston, maybe your parents let you go over here to this fort. I've been there with Mr. Mills before. We like to, he and his wife and me and my wife like to vacation in Charleston before coronavirus. And we've gone over to Fort Sumter before. Several other southern states also decided against secession following Lincoln's election, but something happened that changed the mind of many Southerners, even those who did not own slaves. In the morning on April 12, 1861, a South Carolina militia pointed its cannons at Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor. Then they waited for the order to fire. Confederates were angry that Union forces still controlled the fort, even though South Carolina had left the Union. So this was a United States military fort in Charleston, South Carolina. And they said, you need to get out of town because we're not part of the United States anymore, so you can't have your military in our state. Well, obviously the United States is not giving up their fort, so there's going to be a battle for it. Suddenly the cannons begin to fire, waking the residents of Charleston. People ran to their rooftops and watched the two sides blast away at each other. After more than 30 hours, believe it or not, the U.S. flag came down from the fort. Confederates, the Confederate States of America, won the first battle of the Civil War, the Battle of Fort Sumter. They fired on the United States Army in this fort and beat them. The Civil War had begun. Within days, 4 more slave states, including Tennessee, joined the Confederacy. Is this an unbelievable lesson or what? Can you believe this happened in our country? That the United States was not the United States anymore, and that part of the United States was now its own country, the Confederate States, and now they're going to war with each other. All of the rest of 4th grade talks about the war that they had, the Civil War. It's a lot of information, and it changes our country forever. It took a bad war to make some things be better. Well, we'll be done with our textbook for this week until you use it for your test on Friday. But we're going to come back tomorrow and Thursday, and we'll get into more detail in some of the things that we talked about today. All right. You do have an assignment today. On your assignment today, you're going to need to flip back in your book all the way to page 146. You're going to be using page 146 to this page right here, page 164, to match some of the terms we've learned in this kind of long lesson. For the past week, 2 weeks, we've been going through these pages. Some of the important terms we've learned, you'll be matching them with with their definition, basically. So make sure you use your book, page 146 to 154, to help you find the answers. Every one of the words is highlighted, like the Battle of Fort Sumter is here. So it should be easy to find it. All right, get to work on it. We'll see you tomorrow.